The Nigerian government has continued to make relentless efforts to resolve the country's electricity challenge. Well, the latest of such move is as the government seeks a $5.2 billion loan from the World Bank to expand electricity generation and help the economy recover from its first recession in 25 years. But the question remains, should the loan being sought be approved, as Nigeria's indebtedness to the World Bank would rise to about $11 billion? We'll be seeking answers as investment research analyst with Afrinvest. Eronmosele Aziba joins me in the studio. Many thanks for your time, Eronmosele.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, Nigeria keeps going to these international financiers, the World Bank now this time, to get more loan, and this time for the electricity sector. We know the sector has been in one form of a problem or the other in the past years, and we seem not to still have a head-on with the challenge. Now, with this latest loan, what do you think of it before we go into it being approved?
Well, so like you made note of, funding has been a major challenge that has plagued the whole power sector value chain. So there have been various steps to try to plug some of these gaps. And this is one of them, seeking $5.2 billion loan that is going to be from the World Bank. From the breakdown that we've seen, about 1.3 billion of this 5.2 is going to be from the International Finance Corporation, which is going to be targeted towards some power projects, some of the distribution companies. Then we're also going to have another tranche of about 1.4 billion from the MIGA, that's the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, which will be targeted towards gas production. So it will majorly be focused on the GENCO's aspect of the value chain. And then the other 2.5 billion from the World Bank itself will be for improving transmission capacity and general operations across the chain. So we believe that if this funding is actually provided, we could see operations in the sector improve, even though we know that seeking a loan from the World Bank will increase the country's debt profile. We also know that the 5.2 billion, if approved, won't just be given at once. It'll probably be given in tranches.
Okay, let me butt in there. Of course, it's going to increase the debt of the country. But before we go into that, now this $5.2 billion loan, do you think it would actually solve the problems in the power sector?
Well, it could potentially solve some of the challenges that we mentioned. Also, you have to note that for the World Bank to be giving us any loans, they are probably also going to have their own requirements in terms of improving operations in the sector. So for instance, having more cost-reflective tariffs to show that it's actually a viable investment investment space. And if these are actually put into place, then we should see the resultant improvements in the sector.
All right, then, let's get into this indebtedness by Nigeria with this loan that we'll be sorting. Now, if this loan is approved, it would increase Nigeria's indebtedness to World Bank to about $11 billion. That's excluding smaller loans that have been approved since the March 31st accounting date. Now, if it's approved, what's the implication?
Well, like I mentioned, the country's debt profile is going to rise in terms of looking at debt to GDP.
Of course,
ratio.
It's going to rise, but would it have any major, perhaps negative effect on the economy?
Well, we would probably see debt servicing ratio to revenue also increase, as we would start to see a lot more funds channeled towards debt servicing with the expanding debt base. But given the current state of things, we can say it's rather unavoidable in the sense that that power sector still remains, it still lacks a whole lot of funds. A lot of investors are staying wary of that sector. I mean, even looking at the impact it has had on the books of the banks, recording a lot of bad loans from that sector. So the power sector needs to become economically viable for more investments to flow.
Okay, so how could it get economically viable, really? And in your own view, do you think the government is actually doing what needs to be done within that sector?
Well, if you recall with the privatization that took place, so now we have the Gencos, we have Discos, we have the MBET that sort of guarantees the Gencos that they would pay whatever shortfall still exists after the Discos have made their remittances. But looking at the broad value chain, one of the major challenges that we have seen is broadly tied to the ATC&C losses. So that's the aggregate technical, commercial, and collection losses which we've seen in that space. So for each country usually has their own allowable threshold because it's almost inevitable to have some of these losses. They're generally associated with the power sector. Each country has their own allowable threshold. But for Nigeria, what we've seen is about an average of about 50% across the discos that we have in the country, and that's rather high. That's rather unacceptable when compared to peers. I think the only outlier that you'd have would be something like Eco Disco, which had less than 10% in terms of looking at ATC&C losses, and this was majorly due to the fact that they get, in terms of looking at the revenue that they get, collection is, they actually get the most of the revenue that is accrued to them from their customers. And one major reason for this is the fact that most of their customers have been metered. Metering still remains a key challenge, and until that is addressed, we might continue to see some of these liquidity challenges.
Exactly. Let's talk more about the power sector and it's been able to be a revenue earner for the country, contributing to the GDP. And now, addressing the energy needs in Nigeria requires a lot of investment. We know that. But many countries are going beyond this generation that we have. They're looking at renewable energy. But Nigeria seems still far apart from that area. I know some private entities are actually looking in that direction. And of course, I know the government is also trying its best to actually go in that direction. But what does Nigeria really need to get into that line of business?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to address the current challenge that we're facing, fix the current infrastructure that we have with the power sector before even thinking of looking beyond and moving on to more sophisticated approaches.
All right, okay, but let's look at if these challenges are actually addressed, like you said. What amount, if we're going to be pegging an amount of it, what amount do you think it could contribute to the economy?
Well, looking at stating a particular number might be a challenge.
Difficult.
But if you think of the fact that for most of the manufacturing companies, for instance, they rely heavily, they actually don't rely on the power supply from the grid, in the sense that the erratic,
so if they do not rely on it,
nature.
Do you think, because they actually need this power that we're talking about, but if they do not rely on it, so why do we need to fix it?
No, so here's the challenge actually. So for most of them, they rely on diesel engines to run their factories and all. And in terms of looking at cost, this is a lot costlier than actually getting power from the grid. So if we're to fix some of those issues, then you can see them reduced, their energy costs should come down, which will ultimately trickle down to their bottom line and increase their output and productivity also, which will be generally positive for the economy.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that point. Eronmosele, thank you so much for talking to us on the loans granted to Nigeria by the World Bank. Investment Research Analyst with Afrinvest, Eronmosele Aziba. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.